Hello, everyone. My name is Jordyn Smith, and I am an evolutionary astrologer. Some of you may have seen me on this YouTube channel before or follow me on my own. I have been wanting to do a class on utilizing traumatic experiences within someone's natal chart for a really long time because I feel like it's really beneficial for other astrologers and for students who are wanting to learn about themselves or wanting to help other people. And this journey for me started with having a series of really traumatic experiences that I needed to get to the bottom of in order for me to be able to feel like I could be myself. And doing this work, looking at trauma, whether it be sexual or physical, emotional, spiritual, is really close to my heart because I want to make the world a better place. And I am about to show you all how we can utilize trauma in order to have post-traumatic growth, to have a transformation occur. And I think that it's really important, especially as Pluto's doing this dance with the signs of Aquarius and Capricorn, that all of us understand that there is a way through and that we are here to really heal our emotional bodies in order for us to evolve. And so I want everyone to know that some of the things that I'm going to be talking about could be triggering for some people. The chart example that I'm using is someone who's had massive amounts of trauma. They live in the same state as me, and it's not unheard of here to have this much trauma occur just because of where we're living. It's very patriarchal and very suppressive. So, Sue, will you pull up the PowerPoint so I can get after it? Okay, so I titled this The Road from Trauma to Transformation and Empowering Post-Traumatic Growth Within the Natal Chart, because that's exactly what I want to show everyone can occur whenever you are counseling someone or using your own chart. There are ways for you to understand why things occurred and how there can be growth and transformation instead of staying stuck within the same story of our traumatic experiences. So Sue, if you'll go to the next slide for me, please. So I wanted to give a good definition of what trauma is and where we see it in the natal chart. So this is a really good definition that I got from traumainformedcare.org, and it states that trauma is a pervasive problem that results from exposure to an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and or spiritual well-being, along with collective trauma. So Sue, will you go to the next slide for me? So where we can see this in the chart is through different planetary significators. So with the mental body, we're going to be seeing this in trauma where Uranus is the primary significator and its lower octave Mercury as a secondary significator. And the examples are psychiatric disorders, epilepsy, diseases of the brain, and sudden unexpected changes that alter the psychological reality of the individual and how they have defined the reality prior to that experience. This is where trauma can occur within the mental body. And like I said, you see it with Uranus and Mercury. When we're looking at trauma within the emotional body, we are looking at the planet Pluto as a primary ruler, and the moon and Neptune as secondary rulers. And the examples of emotional trauma are betrayal, abandonment, and gross misuse through misapplied trust, psychological and sexual abuse, sudden loss, experiencing cataclysmic events of an individual or collective nature. And then whenever you are looking at trauma within the physical body, we're going to be seeing this with Saturn. And the examples of physical traumas are severe injuries of various types, rape, torture, intense physical illness, degeneration of the body through various causes such as disease, and also birth disorders. And when we're looking at the spiritual body and trauma that has occurred within the spiritual body, we are looking at Neptune. And that usually occurs whenever there's a loss of faith, a loss of belief, a loss of values, massive disillusionment, and rare cases of being possessed by an unwanted spirit. This is coming from the Essays on Evolutionary Astrology by Jeffrey Wolf Green, and I wanted to put it here because whenever I speak about my client and my friend that I'm utilizing, this is someone who has experienced trauma within the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual body. And usually what ends up happening is if we experience trauma in one area, it will have a comorbid effect on other areas. So it can be a ripple effect. And Sue, if you will change to the next slide for me. I wanted to go over the relationship types and why we call them in, because this will correlate to the trauma that we experience and how, when we're affected by trauma, we will call in certain types of dynamics. And that is in order to grow and evolve, we have to have relationships because they give us an opportunity to compare and contrast in order to evolve. Through many lifetimes, we can develop a type of relationship that is known and familiar to us, and we can repeat that type of relationship, whether it be healthy or not. And so the relationship types that we can have are codependent, which I feel like a lot of people, that's a buzzword. We can have these codependent and enmeshed relationships because it's also seen within society. It's really embedded in our society. If you look at rom-coms or Facebook, the idealization of what a relationship should be is really reflecting codependent and enmeshed behaviors. We can also have the counselor, counselee, or the student and teacher, which I feel like both of those are very self-explanatory. We can have the sadomasochistic, which is very prevalent in society, more so than people would think. And sadism is oftentimes seen with men, but you can also see it in women. And masochistic is often the majority of the time seen in women or people who identify as female. And so what this is it stems from patriarchal, man-made religious undertones. This is where a woman will feel guilty for saying no. And this is where a man will ghost a woman after they kissed. And what it really is there's conditioned guilt around different types of belief structures. And there is a need, if you're masochistic, to feel like you need to atone for the guilt, even if it's conditioned and you really shouldn't be feeling guilty. And sadism is whenever there is guilt and it comes out with an anger. And usually, you know, these are really intense relationships. This is oftentimes where you will see battered women syndrome, and it can get really, really scary. The next one is self-sufficient, meaning that these are two people who come together and they're together just because they like to be together. They're both self-sufficient, they're both sovereign unto themselves, and they're not depending on each other. They're there to help with growth, but they're not forcing it or being enmeshed with it. Both are their own people. And then within these special types, we have karma mates. which we see this with the majority of relationships. This is whenever two souls are having emotional and psychological dynamics that they weren't able to actualize in prior lifetimes. And there is a karmic need to come back together in the prior life and to be able to resolve those issues. And these can be really intense relationships. There's oftentimes this feeling of, oh my gosh, I feel like I've met you before, but also like a repulsion as well, but not all the time. And then there's soulmates, which are really two people who have been traveling many, many lifetimes together in order to help each other out. And most oftentimes, these are very self-sufficient. And within that type, that special type of soulmates, there's also an additional subtype called a same soul. And this is whenever one soul is really wanting to speed up their evolution, and they're in a higher stage of evolution. And so they will choose to incarnate into two different people in order to work on separate dynamics that they're wanting to evolve through and out of at a faster pace. And oftentimes you'll see this with a, people in my generation often call this a twin flame, and it's not. It's, you often see this with a child and a parent. Sometimes it can be a romantic partner, but oftentimes it's family members. And then you have a twin soul, which is a soul who was made at the same time, same moment as the other soul. And so they look alike, they are working out the same issues, but those really don't ever work out because there's no room for growth because they're both working on the same things. And then there's souls in different evolutionary states, which is something that happens oftentimes because of conditioning. We can feel like we are taking on the values of how we've been conditioned, and we can get into relationships with people that are not on the same evolutionary state as us because we've been self-abandoning. And so we've called in someone who really isn't in resonance with us. And so there's a need to be responsible in that whenever one understands that they're in different evolutionary states, because if it's too far of a gap, it's really hard for it to work. And oftentimes these relationships, whenever there are people in two different evolutionary states, the one that's in a further advanced state is going to feel like they're carrying the other one with them. And so it's a feeling of them being slowed down. So Sue, let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to go over all of that information for everyone so that way things would make sense whenever we're looking at this chart. Keeping in mind the planets that rule the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual body are all put in Capricorn in this person's 6th house with Hygeia. And before I really delve into this, I wanted to mention that this is a soul who is in the individuated stages of evolution, who has experienced mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual trauma. And these traumatic experiences had the effect of conditioning them to be codependent and masochistic because that was what they were used to lifetime after lifetime. The relationships they ended up having would serve as a catalyst for growth in order for them to get to the bottom of why and what they needed to do in order to actualize their soul's intentions in this lifetime. So we must first look at the Pluto paradigm to understand the why of this soul choosing to reincarnate into the type of familial, societal, cultural, and religious conditioning. Then we must understand what types of relationships they have called in and why. All of this can be seen within the chart, including their trauma. So before I start speaking on this chart, I'm going to give some background information. This is a Potawatomi and Caucasian person who was born female and who now, identifies as non-binary. This is also a soul who was born to a mom who was 16 years old, whose family told her that she needed to abort this child, went to a school for girls in that situation and ended up running away. And the mom had this client of mine, but was very neglectful. And this soul grew up in a household where there was extreme dogmatic views revolving around religion, and there was also eugenics being taught within the household as well. This is also a soul who experienced rape at a very young age by a step grandfather, and it was something that her mom had experienced whenever they were younger as well, and same with their aunt. And whenever they spoke up about it when they were older, they were ostracized for it when they were trying to help other children within their family. This was a soul, this is a soul who has experienced a lot of mental and emotional abuse by the family, being called names, just really treated very, very, very poorly, like the worst of the worst. This was a soul who was taken out of school at a young age and forced to stay at home and help take care of the siblings that their mom ended up having in other marriages. This is also a soul who does not know who their biological father is, and their mother won't tell them. And this is a soul who has been working on the why of it all. So I wanted to give that background before we jump into this. So with knowing all of that, we have to start with Pluto. And Pluto is in this person's fourth house. And so we know that this person has been, prior to this life, been needing to get to the bottom of their emotional dynamics and understanding how to be self-secure and how to emotionally validate themselves. They have, with Pluto being in Scorpio, have experienced massive amounts of the rug being pulled up from underneath them. So they have been learning whom to trust and whom not to. With Libra on the fourth house cusp where Pluto is, this really speaks to a soul who has been abandoning oneself for the sake of self-preservation within their family system in this lifetime and many other lifetimes. This is also someone who is wanting to penetrate and get to the bottom of all of these dynamics in order to be their own authority and to have a better relationship with themselves and to know whom they are. Pluto is squaring the nodal axis. And in evolutionary astrology, we know that that means that there's been a skipped step created. That this is a soul who's been flip-flopping back and forth between the dynamics of the South Node in Leo in the first house and the North Node in Aquarius in the seventh. And we're needing to look at how to resolve this dynamic. And so Pluto last conjunct the South Node in Leo. And so what this is this is an extreme focus of, if this soul is wanting to get to the bottom of these emotional dynamics and how to have inner security, they're really working on needing to self-actualize and needing to create self-love and harmony within, and understanding whom they are and understanding whom they are and having an identity outside of the family system and their conditioning. And that's the way that they creatively actualize. If you look at their South Node ruler, it is the sun in the 6th house. It is also conjunct the North Node ruler. It is in Capricorn. And so this is really about becoming one's own authority and doing it step by step and taking it, one step at a time in order to self-improve through how they believe about themselves. So as they do that, it helps them liberate from old ways of being in relationship with themselves and in relationship with others. And so it will naturally pull in that North Node. And you can see that over many, many lifetimes, this soul has had massive amounts of trauma stemming from relationships. Whenever you look at that Venus and Aquarius being ruled by their Uranus and that Capricorn stellium, we can see that there's been an extreme amount of trauma. So when we're looking at these dynamics, we need to know why. Why is this soul working on wanting to get to the bottom of this? Why is this soul wanting to understand what self-love is and how to not abandon oneself and wanting to know whom to trust and whom not to? And if you look at their chart, you can see that the South Node's ruler, the sun, is directly conjunct that Uranus, and it's in this stellium with Neptune, Saturn, Hygeia, and Mercury. And so this soul in prior lifetimes has endured so much trauma revolving around conditioning Capricorn that has affected the way that they feel about themselves and the ability to emotionally validate themselves and to understand whom they are. If you look at this moon, it is in Sagittarius. And so this is someone who is wanting to understand the natures of beliefs because they create the foundation for their emotional body and what constitutes their emotional security. But this is a soul who's been conditioned to conform to other people's beliefs about them. When I started working with this particular client and friend, I will say, they were very self-loathing and very self-deprecating because there were massive amounts of being told whom they were their whole life. And it created a phenomenon where, oh gosh, what is the word I'm looking for? It was self-fulfilling prophecies that would happen. They were told that they were this person and they believed it. And because if you're told that by authority figures in your life, eventually you can believe that if that's something that you're needing to work through. And so there was this cycle of never being good enough, never being able to take care of oneself. And they were really working towards getting out of this. And so where this trauma occurred in the prior lifetime that they're re-experiencing was set off whenever they were 3 years old. If you look at this chart, Chiron is in Cancer, retrograde in the 12th house. And retrogrades are repeat, relive, redo in order to resolve, especially with Pluto also squaring the nodes and us having to concentrate on that South Node. This is someone, when Chiron is in Cancer and in the 12th house, for this particular person really reflects that they lost their innocence in childhood because of, and the way their self-security, their emotional security. And that was dealing with the sexual assault and the perpetuation of sexual assaults going on. And if you look at Chiron, it's opposing directly Within 1 degree, Saturn, which is conjunct Neptune, and this speaks to the sexual assault, and it being conjunct Uranus also speaks to it being a step grandfather. And it also speaks to how this was physical trauma and mental trauma. And it also speaks to the spiritual trauma, because this is someone who became atheist and didn't believe in anything. If you look at Jupiter and Cancer in the 12th house, which is also retrograde, it is at 5 degrees opposing that Uranus and Sun as well. And so there has been a need to really liberate and throw off the imbalances that have occurred stemming from conditioned and projected beliefs about this person that have affected how they emotionally relate to themselves and how they emotionally validate themselves. What is their emotional security? But within all of this trauma and them re-experiencing it, they had to learn through their conditioning how to have self-preservation, and that was to be in codependent relationships with other people, because in order to survive, you want to listen to what other people are saying, so that way you don't get in trouble for being who you are. This was really the whole underlying, one of the underlying issues that was happening with this person. And so there was where did I want to go with this? There is a need for the soul to understand, going back to the moon, what are beliefs, what is true for them, and the need to get to the bottom of that, with Scorpio on that 5th house cusp where the moon and Mars are. Mars is also in a sextile with Venus, and so they have these soul desires to really understand what their natural truths are and to use those for a way to creatively actualize. And the creative actualization comes through the integration point of the sun being in Capricorn in the 6th house. This is someone who wants to be their own authority, wants to learn how to be their own authority by knowing what their natural truths are. And Mars is in conjunct Jupiter. And so there have been crises around these dynamics stemming from this trauma, from childhood and prior lifetimes. Also with Capricorn, because this is a soul who was re-experiencing these traumatic events early on in life, it was because in prior lifetimes, similar instances happened and it created fragmentation, and they were not able to understand or get to the bottom of the emotional dynamics, and they repressed it with all that cap. And so the need is to go into the emotional body and understand how this is manifesting within them, and the need to really heal this and learn to come into a different awareness about it and understand their natural truths, and to throw off how they had been conditioned to believe about themselves. So within the Capricorn archetype, there's also delayed post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is something that happened definitely with this soul. There's a couple of other things I wanted to point out. There is a Pluto in conjunct to the midheaven. There's also a Saturn square to the midheaven as well. These are all these indicators of having crisis whenever there's a lack of putting one foot in front of the other, the 6th house, in order to be one's own authority and getting it to the bottom of their emotional dynamics. And so crisis kept happening in their life, one thing after another, 6th house, that's stellium, until later on in life. And so Sue, before you go, sorry. If you look at the propensity of the sixth house. This is, and Libra on the fourth house cusp. You can see that this is someone who their conditioning created a situation where they would call in not only codependent relationships, but also sadomasochistic relationships. Because if you don't believe, you don't know your personal truths, you don't understand your emotional dynamics, and you feel like you've been conditioned to be the lowest of the low, you are going to have relational dynamics where that occurs, even if it's not the truth, and it's not the truth. So, okay, Sue, you can go to the next slide. So this is the aftermath of the trauma that occurred within this person's childhood. And these are the relationship dynamics utilized to get to the bottom of the soul's evolution. So their first adult relationship, this is a relationship that lasted 7 years. The client had been single and happy right before and was figuring out who they were. And then this person came into their life and they got into a very codependent relationship with them. And this was someone that, in my client's own words, they allowed to tell them who they were. So this is also this same imprinting from childhood coming back into play in this relationship as an adult. So it's also with the Cancer and Capricorn energy in this chart having a de facto parent, because one wasn't ever okay. Sorry guys, I have wonky internet. We have storms coming in. So this is someone who, because of the childhood trauma that occurred and not knowing how to meet one's own needs and being conditioned, that set the scene up for them to have codependent relationships. They were working out these early childhood and prior life dynamics with their early first adult relationships. So these were de facto parents to this person, to my client. And you can see that Pluto was directly conjunct my client's sun the day that, these are transits for the day that my client met these people. Pluto is directly conjunct their sun. And so also there was Mercury and Leo conjunct their south node, and Hygeia was on their Pluto. We are looking at, if you remember, my client had said that they were single and happy. It was, like they were really enjoying it. And so this was coming around again to be able to get them in touch with how to creatively actualize how to be their own authority in their life. That's that Mercury on the south node. It's Pluto being on their natal sun. It's also the north node on their moon, and also opposing Mars and Gemini in the 11th house. So there was a need to relearn what their own set of values were for liberation to occur. That is where you see Taurus on the 11th house cusp, where that transiting south node and Mars is. With Mercury on the south node, the intention was for them to creatively actualize through learning and getting to the bottom of what it meant to be their own personal authority. Uranus was transiting in Aries in the 9th house and was square that Pluto Sun conjunction. And so there was a need to really liberate from old beliefs that created guilt and shame. And that Uranus is also ruled by their natal Mars. And so you can see this is around their beliefs and the conditioned beliefs. This is a relationship where this client said that they adopted his values instead of understanding their own, and it was a very verbally abusive relationship. So when you look at Saturn in this chart that's transiting in the third house and in Libra, it is square that Neptune. And so this was really a relive, redo in order to restructure and relearn how to be in relationships that were based on equanimity, as opposed to relationships that were, you know, submissive and overpowering dynamics. So this relationship also had Venus on when they met. There was Venus transiting conjunct that Chiron. So this was to bring up old dynamics around how they emotionally validated themselves because they were needing to work on it. So my client, you know, these are two souls that are karma mates. They have done this before. They were in a relationship in prior lifetimes where these types of dynamics were still existing. And in this lifetime, it still didn't work out. It was the same repeat, relive, and there really wasn't any resolving at this point in time. That North Node being on the moon was really there to facilitate their natal Jupiter, for them to resolve the dynamics around the beliefs that have affected what emotional security is for them. And it was a time where they were called to creatively actualize within that by being their own authority. So the moon being on the North Node as well in Aquarius, which is ruled by their natal Uranus, really speaks to the verbal and mental abuse that happened and occurred during this relationship, where they felt extremely judged, Capricorn on that 7th house cusp, and were allowing this person to condition themselves and condition them by adopting their values instead of being their own authority. That's also the Libra Capricorn square that's going on. So what ended up happening was, this client really didn't like the situation that they were in. They weren't getting to the bottom of these dynamics. During this relationship, Sue, you can go to the next slide. They met someone, and instead of reflecting and doing the Capricorn natural expression of reflecting on what had just occurred, this client met the partner that we're looking at the transit here. This is the second adult relationship. This is the day that they met this partner as well. And so this soul met this partner before they broke up with the other partner, and then immediately became a couple. And this time period of when they met occurred just before my client's brother was murdered, and is also part of this relive experience. And the reason why I put at the top underneath second adult relationship, it takes an extreme to counteract an extreme, that is because this relationship became very extreme and very, very abusive in order to counteract the dynamics of codependency, enmeshment, and masochism that my client was going through. So during this relationship, my client had stated that this guy was like their partner prior to, but like on crack. Like it was just, blown up even bigger. Same dynamics, just way more intense. So this guy was extremely verbally abusive, and there was some physical violence. You can see Pluto is transiting and conjunct that Saturn right there in the 6th house. So it speaks to the physical violence of what was occurring. Again, Mercury is on the south node. And now we have Saturn on the moon. So yet again, this is an opportunity to make a different choice. And it's an opportunity to be one's own authority by creatively actualizing, self-love and understanding their own personal truths with that moon and the Leo south node. But this relationship occurred because it did. This is a soul who needed an extreme to counteract an extreme. If we're looking at all the trauma that this soul has endured and how it's affected them and their emotional security, the last relationship it didn't really help them. It didn't help them get to the bottom of these dynamics that we've been talking about. And this relationship, it was so extreme and awful that it did. So after my client's brother died, which you can also see the, Mercury on the south node, it's ruled by the transiting sun in Cancer conjunct Mars. This was, their brother was autistic and was murdered in the street, outside of the boys' home that he was staying at. And it was an extremely traumatic experience for my client because they had really been parentified. That's all of their Capricorn as well as a child. And they took care of their brother. And so this was extremely traumatizing to them. You can also see that this Mars, the transiting Mars Sun conjunction, is opposing their natal Mercury. And so this speaks to siblings and the death of a sibling happening. And during this relationship, my client wanted to express themselves. This is also this theme of Mercury that's showing up in this chart. So they were wanting to express themselves and wasn't allowed to talk about it. Their partner told them that they were talking about it to get attention. And so my friend and client never processed this during this period of time. And suppressed it, which is another function of Capricorn. So they felt like they were being oppressed and that they had to suppress what was going on, how they were feeling. And it was just a repeat of what happened in childhood, because that is exactly how they were conditioned to be, was to not say anything, to shut up, be quiet. You don't have a voice. You need to do as I say, so they were re-experiencing all of these same dynamics. This is also someone who controlled their eating. And this is also seen with Pluto transiting the sixth house stellium. Sixth house, sometimes there can be eating disorders that come up, and also if someone's suppressing your eating, this is Pluto on their Saturn and conjunct all of their other planets. So also with transiting Saturn on their natal moon, you can see that and it was retrograde, this was a re-experience of an authority figure from a prior lifetime who had conditioned them and projected upon them the same types of things that their family in this lifetime did. So they were re-experiencing this. And Ceres being conjunct their natal Jupiter, transiting Ceres and Cancer, this was a period of time where they were getting to reclaim their own identity through this experience, but it didn't happen at first. What they ended up doing is they went and they moved to Colorado. They ran away. That was the only way that they felt like they could really get away from these types of dynamics. They wanted to have a clean break. It gave them a period of time to really start to think for themselves, and it created objectivity for them by creating, like, having the space and the distance. And so, Sue, will you go to the next slide for me, please? So this is when the steps to their healing and utilizing strengths started to occur. Right before they had their Saturn return, It was just a couple weeks before, so it was still in the window of their Saturn return. They broke up with that person. And through living in Colorado and eventually coming back during their Saturn return, they met friends who were vibrating at a different frequency, and they were working on some of the same similar dynamics. So if you look at Mercury and the Sun that are transiting in the 7th house are conjunct this client's North Node. So just by creating the space that was necessary for objectivity to occur, they were getting to think for themselves and to start to liberate from these beliefs and to start to actualize their South Node, utilizing that transiting Sun and their own natal Sun as well. And also with the Saturn return, this is, I like to tell people this is when you become an adult, because you're meant to shed all of the conditioning before this time. But because of the objectivity and the willingness to really dive deeply and get to the bottom of these dynamics, it really did start to call in friends for this person that were healthy and healing for them, that wouldn't allow them to be codependent with them and wanted them to know their own self-worth. This also, you can see the South Node and Pluto and the Moon were all conjunct their Mercury as well, and this speaks to this dynamic. This was to help them learn to be their own authority by re-experiencing having certain people come back into their lives where in the prior lifetimes they weren't able to, there were separations within those friendships, I'll say that. So if you look at Jupiter is conjunct their Moon, Ceres is conjunct their Mars, they have Uranus, Mars square to their natal Mercury. This was a time where they started utilizing the South Node. By that, Uranus Mars is ruled by their natal Mars in the 5th house. That is ruled by their natal Jupiter, and then they had a Jupiter transit to their Moon. So they started to liberate from old beliefs by getting to the bottom of them, and they started to expand upon and understand what their own natural truths were about themselves. Jupiter conjunct that Moon as well. And what it started to do, if you look at their natal Jupiter opposing their Sun, Uranus, this is a repeating signature of what I'm talking about. This was a time that kick-started the ability to creatively actualize through being one's own authority and throwing off the voices of others that really weren't in resonance with whom they were on a soul level, and really starting to understand whom they were without listening to those voices. Prior to this, from everything I've said, my client even said that, they said that they felt, excuse my French, but they said that they felt like they were a piece of shit, like that they felt like they deserved this. Everything that happened to them, they felt like they deserved that. And that is speaking to masochism. And so during the Saturn return, they were wanting to really liberate from masochism and really wanting to understand their trauma. And they started to do that. Sue, go to the next chart. But when you have Capricorn and all of the things that I'm talking about, there can be an experience of delayed post-traumatic stress disorder. And this soul was working through their traumas and how they had to find the reality and learning to lean into their emotions. And this happened through understanding their depression after becoming suicidal. During this transit, they chose to put themselves in the facility as an act of self-love and taking responsibility for their own healing and growth. they actually called this a spiritual awakening for them. So you can see that this was what a lot of people, especially society, would say is a really bad thing about going to a psychiatric facility and being depressed and all of that. This was actually a really, really, really good thing for this soul, because it started to help perpetuate the healing on a spiritual level. And you can see that Mercury is transiting Mercury is conjunct their Neptune. This was also a day before their birthday. And I want you guys to know that not only did they say that this was a spiritual awakening, but at the end of the night, because they had to fight to get into a mental health facility, because the first one they went to, they gave them Prozac and told them, if you become suicidal, then let us know. And they were already suicidal, but they became even more suicidal. And then they finally put them into a facility. And this is stemming from the depression of their brother and all of their childhood stuff. They had said that all of a sudden they were like driving down a road and they were remembering why they cut off talking to their grandparents, because of all of the sexual abuse. And they were ruminating, which is also a 6, on how the family didn't believe them and just how hurt that they ostracized. And I mean, it was definitely, they felt victimized, but they didn't want to anymore. And with Mercury on Saturn and Neptune, they were wanting to be their own authority. Same with this during this solar return. They were getting to the bottom of what they valued and what gave them meaning and their own personal relationship with themselves. If you look at Venus, it is retrograde and conjunct their Mercury and also conjunct Pluto. And so this was a time period of them getting to the bottom of their relationship with themselves. You can see that Uranus is transiting their 11th house, and it's ruled by that Venus and their natal Venus. And so this was a really powerful time to advocate for themselves around their mental health. But I wanted to share this. My client said that night, they finally got into this mental psychiatric facility, and it was the night before their birthday. They had fought to get there. And they said that they sat on the bed once they got there and they sang themselves happy birthday as an act of self-love. And so this is actually them resolving this Pluto square the South Node as well, in tandem with their South Node ruler in all of their Capricorn. They started the work during their Saturn return, but during this was like that moment that we get sometimes in life where the universe puts an experience and says, okay, you've been working, so here's an experience. What are you going to do? Are you going to integrate this, or are you going to fall back on the old way of being? And my client said that, that they did not want to kill themselves. And you can see that transiting Moon and Virgo in the 2nd house with Leo on the cusp is opposing transiting Neptune, and it's all in a T-square with their natal moon. And so this is a repeat also with the South Node and Mars conjunct their natal Mars. This is a repeat in this lifetime of where they have committed suicide in the past because of the same type of dynamics. And in this lifetime, they chose to not do that. And they chose to resolve their Pluto and South Node dynamics. And what this has done for them, if you look at transiting Saturn, falling in their 7th house and conjunct their Venus and their North Node, it's been pulling in their North Node through the creative actualization that they've been doing, of becoming their own authority, of understanding their natural truths. And as this has occurred, they have been gaining objectivity and more clarity, and it has radically altered their relationship with themselves, and it has created a new foundation with how they do relationships with other people. And they're happily single still right now, and they are in friendships that are not codependent. I wanted to see if I wanted to talk about anything else. So yeah, as they were having their solar return, they were having their Mars return. Pluto was on Mercury. Mars was trining Chiron in the 9th. And the transiting moon in Virgo, like I said, was opposite Neptune and in a T-square to the moon. And Neptune was sextile that Mercury. So this was a whole reconstruction of how they had to find themselves. It was an ultimate shedding the layers and the skins of the past of where they had overly identified and bought into the beliefs that were conditioned upon them and projected upon them about who they were, that were not in alignment with their actual truth. And the act of them putting themselves into the psychiatric facility, just their evolution started happening, the growth within that at a very rapid pace. And when they were in the mental health facility, they got back in touch with their ability to write. They had been told that they were not a good writer their whole life. They were told that they weren't a good artist. All of the things that they loved, they were conditioned to believe that they were really bad at it. And during this stay, they started writing poetry and they started doing art. And they started asking me about what they could do to create a deeper spiritual relationship with themselves and with something higher. So now they relate, their beliefs are around agnosticism instead of atheist. And so they started doing ritual during full moons and new moons as a way of self-love, where they would write meditations or affirmations and things that they wanted to release, and they would burn them because it's utilizing their fire energy within their chart, their South Node in Leo, their moon and Mars, and in Sag also in a fire house. So a natural fire house. So with the square from Chiron also to their natal sun and Uranus, this was literally helping them not only liberate from old beliefs, but to creatively actualize and to be a courageous self-leader and understanding their natural truths while dissolving old delusional beliefs that were revolving around their conditioning from their childhood experiences and early adult experiences and the relive of their prior life experiences. So Sue, I wanted to go to the next slide so I can show you guys. I said that by getting to the bottom of the why within the soul's chart, they learned that the biggest catalyst for transformation is by utilizing the creative force within and to creatively express themselves in an authentic way and to understand what their truths are and learn self-love. This helps them to liberate from old conditioning and the healing effects of all of their Capricorn energy expressed naturally. This is a soul who is utilizing writing, drawing, and ritual to help to heal mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, along with a holistic approach to their mental and emotional health through various forms of therapy. They are continuously resolving their South Node and healing trauma by self-actualizing as their own authority and taking it one step at a time. This has helped liberate them from prior conditioning revolving around relationships and transforming the way that they inwardly relate by shedding the conditioned beliefs of others. And they are now wanting to go to school to be a therapist, which I thought was really cool. So Sue, I wanted to show just some of the ways that this client has been creatively actualizing. This was a poem that they wrote whenever they were in that mental health facility. And I wanted to read it because it really speaks to this Capricorn stellium in the 6th house and also their Pluto. So it's called My Very Own Prison Guard. I did it. I graduated. The uniform was handed down in a secret ceremony. So secret, I missed it. I lovingly press it every day. It receives all my attention. Expert level reached long ago. Meanwhile, the shower longs for me. The fancy toothbrush warns me. I can't convince myself that anything else matters. Nothing comes between me and my uniform. Nothing but the maggots. They're comfortable there too. It's too deep. It's the only lesson that ever stuck. You can't unlearn your DNA. You learn to live with it. Boy, this is taking a turn. Turns out learning to live with it is just an unending limbo game of lowered standards. Squalor is easy, zero expectations, smooth sailing. Or is it? Is this pressure worth this iron grip on my own soul? Will I ever let go? It's crushing. I can't move. I can't breathe. I can't think. I don't want to be my own prison guard anymore. So to me, I mean, that even makes me teary-eyed reading it. This has been posted on various social media places as a way for my client to utilize the South Node and to self-express, because for so long that they've been told that they can't. And they've really been helping people through their poetry, because people are now having a discourse with them about what they grew up in and how it's affected them. And it's utilizing Capricorn in the 6th house to really speak for those who don't have a voice. And so they are transforming their traumatic experiences as a way to connect with other people and to help them, the ones that don't have a voice, just like this client didn't before, felt like they didn't before. And so if you'll go to the next slide, this is some of their artwork that they started doing while they were in the psychiatric facility and outside of it. I actually, the one that has the pink background on it was started at my house. We were sitting on my back porch. And this is someone who could not make a mistake. If you look at that center, I mean, that all of their Capricorn in the 6th house, they were groomed and conditioned about perfection. And when they started doing art, it was really healing for them, because they would make a mistake and then they would turn the mistake into a piece of art. And this happened within both of these, which it doesn't look like that because these look almost perfect to me. Like, I'm like, whoa, but both of these had mistakes that they decided to work with. And so it's another beautiful and natural expression and manifestation of the inner work being projected out through them being able to self-express in another way as well. So really understanding that imperfections can be beautiful and things aren't perfect, that perfection is an illusion. And then Sue, if you'll go to the last slide, this is them doing ritual work and, you know, giving themselves affirmations, letting it burn and go to the ancestors, and also burning things that they want to purify and purge from within. And so it's utilizing, you know, how they want to be more connected to spirit, and understanding that they are part of something much bigger and wanting to have self-love. And so I hope that this was beneficial to everyone. This was my first class. I feel a little flustered. And yeah, I hope that this helps other people. I'm going to be doing more of these. So I look forward to it. And thank you all so much for tuning in and watching.
Oh my God, Jordyn, that was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. You did
Yes,
such
thank
an
you.
awesome
No
job.
problem. Thank you.
Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.